Dr. Roger Barker.
Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to be here. I realise that this is the most challenging session of the day, the post-lunch session. So my challenge is to rouse you from your post-lunch torpor and talk about AI in organisations. Well, as this conference demonstrates, AI is still very much the topic of the moment. And I have to admit, this is time for a personal admission, that a couple of years ago, maybe 3 years ago, it wasn't really top of my own personal list of priorities, the things I was focusing on. I very much see myself as a corporate governance geek rather than a tech geek. And as I was looking at the world of science and technology and thinking about, what's going to be the next big thing that could affect companies, there were lots of other competitors for those top slots. There were things like blockchain, there was quantum computing, there was gene editing, and so on. All of these things seemed to be promising, and AI was just one amongst them. Of course, the launch of ChatGPT in November of 2022. I mean, it's only a short period ago, November 2022, but that really has changed everything. And now suddenly I find myself immersed in discussions with the UK government talking about how AI should be regulated. And also with IOD members who are business leaders, mainly in the UK, but also beyond. And how can we apply AI to our business organisations? Well, I think that, when AI is talked about, there's still quite a dichotomy in terms of the degree of optimism with which people view it. I think, there are some predictions still which very much verge on the dystopian. I mean, this is Noah Harari, a well-known philosopher, who is very pessimistic about AI. He would see AI actually taking over from human beings in many aspects of life. He's described AI as an alien species that could trigger humanity's extinction. On the other hand, here's Elon Musk. Elon Musk has warned, actually, that we could be getting to this stage of AI being capable of undertaking most human activities sooner than we think. In fact, in March of this year, he tweeted that, quote, AI will probably be smarter than any single human next year. By 2029, AI is probably smarter than all humans combined. And I suppose along with that optimism about the speed of development, we also have, the view of the business community and economists, which sees the potential of AI for productivity growth as being absolutely tantalizing. Now, a report published in March by ARK Invest predicted a $40 trillion boost to global gross domestic product due to AI by 2030. So if you consider that global GDP is currently around 100 trillion, and 2030 is only 6 years away, then that's a massive economic impact, a huge expansion in global economic potential in a very short period of time. However, there are more seasoned business observers out there who are taking a somewhat more skeptical approach. And they tend to think that AI's impact on business is going to follow a similar kind of pattern to previous technologies in terms of how they impacted business. And here you can see something known as Gartner's hype cycle. And what this essentially says is that with any new technology, there will be a period of hype during which time all possibilities are thought to be endless. Then the hype will subside, people will become more realistic, and especially around the potential and also the limitations of the technology. And then we'll have a much more of an integration of the technology in a more normal situation. And you could argue that currently we're in the hype. We're at the top of that peak in terms of AI, at the peak of inflated expectations. And certainly if you look at what's been going on the stock market recently, look at the share price of NVIDIA, for example, and other AI-related shares. There is certainly a lot of concern, I think, in the market that maybe we're in a bubble and maybe expectations are rather unrealistic and inflated at the moment. So it's still very difficult to determine the kind of timeline of the path we're going to follow with AI in business. And most people are agreed that there will be transformative and fundamental change. But when will that happen? Is that going to happen in a few years' time, or will that actually take decades? Now, a recent study which the Institute of Directors conducted with London Business School found that although AI will be likely transformative in the long run, it's currently exerting a very uneven impact on companies and sectors. So if you look at the component technologies of AI, things like natural language processing, machine learning, and deep learning, these are being rolled out across organizations, but in different ways. So we have a situation in business and IT operations where AI is being used to sift through large amounts of data and reduce the amount of time it takes to detect anomalies, troubleshoot errors, and monitor performance. I mean, one definition of AI which I really like, which I think describes its nature very well, is that AI is data analytics on steroids. And that, I think, is very much what it's out there to do. So to give a few examples, Siemens uses AI to analyze its machinery, data from its machinery, and to predict when equipment should be shut down and maintained. BMW uses AI as a tool of quality control. It places sensors into machinery to determine whether quality control standards are being met. We've heard on the panel just before how AI has been used in marketing. You can use AI essentially to identify trends and just decide where you're going to target your market research. A great example of this recently was Coca-Cola, which used AI to create a personalized jingle for the ads of Coca-Cola that was based on the online behavior of specific people and their musical preferences. It's really, AI is being hugely in the field of customer service. And as we all know, you can use AI bots to give better customer service in many cases, actually, and faster response times. So an example of that is the beauty company Sephora, which is using AI-powered chatbots to provide personalized product recommendations based on skin type, preferences, and past purchases. And Bank of America has developed a virtual assistant called Erica, which is helping customers manage their finances through voice, text, and tap interactions. Another big area of application at the moment is in cybersecurity. And AI tools are being used to improve network security, to detect fraud, and to help prevent data breaches. Now, of course, it's also the case that increased use of technology in the workplace itself creates security problems. But what AI is trying to do is to counter this threat by using things like deep learning models to identify network behavior that might signal an attempted attack on the network. Now, a yet further area of AI at the moment relates to what's described as supply chain management. Companies like Walmart are using predictive analytics to help forecast future shipping and material costs, and that helps them to manage their inventories. Amazon uses AI extensively to optimize the delivery routes of its drivers to save time and fuel, and it's using robots in its warehouses to assist in sorting and moving packages. But let me now turn to something which was discussed a bit by the last panel, which is how AI is impacting directly on the work of boards of directors, the organization's main governance body. Now, it was touched on in the discussion that an AI device could, in the future, actually become a board member. And I wonder what you think about that possibility, an AI actually becoming a member of the board. Well, it actually has already happened. In 2014, a Hong Kong venture capital firm, Deep Knowledge Ventures, announced that it had appointed an AI to its board of directors. So it appointed VITAL, which stands for Validating Investment Tool for Advancing Life Sciences. That was appointed to its board, and VITAL was given an equal vote in investment decisions. In 2016, the Finnish tech company, Tito, also appointed a voting AI board member called Alicia T. And in April of this year, IHC, which is an Abu Dhabi-based investment company, appointed an AI-powered observer known as Aiden Insight to its board. So in this case, it's not going to be a voting member of the board, but it will perform data analysis, risk assessment, compliance monitoring, and other tasks in support of the board. So, I suppose this kind of thing is great publicity for a tech company at the moment, although maybe at the moment it's still something of a gimmick. But I think that appointing an AI as a board member does pose some very interesting questions for the future of directorship and the future of government, especially relating to the legal status and accountability of directors. Now, in most countries, it's a requirement that board members are natural persons, i.e. human beings. But that could conceivably change, and it's not true in all countries. So if boards were more widely permitted to appoint a machine as a director, where would the legal and the financial liability for decisions be assigned? I mean, an AI can't be sued, it can't be punished, it can't even be sent to prison. These, I suppose, are at the moment somewhat theoretical legal and governance questions, but it's important to start thinking about them now. I suppose in the short term, the right sort of outcome for boards is that AI tools offer the opportunity for board members to devote more attention to strategy, to people and ethical considerations, and reduce the amount of time that they spend on administrative compliance and risk management type activities. In other words, to focus on the areas where human beings have an advantage, a comparative advantage relative to machines. And it's certainly the case that many of these benefits are emerging. We've heard about how AI tools can be used to summarize huge board packs. A 1,000-page board pack can be summarized in 10, 20 pages, highlighting the most important areas for board members to consider and to think about. And the fact that you can record and transcribe board meetings, create the minutes very easily, and the action items. Another area where you could use AI is in board evaluation, which is now a very common process in terms of governance. You could use AI to create detailed reports with significant insights based on benchmarking with other organizations. Now, all of this greater use of AI in the boardroom, it sounds amazing, and I think it could bring real benefits, but it also brings significant risks. For example, where would board data, which is used in these systems, be processed? The data of the provider may become part of the model database, leading obviously to confidentiality and intellectual property issues. And how do we ensure that models are being trained with the right data? Now, I think we've all discovered with ChatGPT and other systems that if automated algorithms analyze dubious information long enough, after a while, they start to treat that as the truth, and misinformation or bias may become viewed as factual truth. And I think it's also the case that often these models, they can be very, as it were, pleasing in nature. They want to generate an answer. They've been built to generate an answer, even though the model may not have the knowledge, it may not have the input which is needed to provide actually an adequate answer to a specific question. So the question for us then as directors will be, how do we know if our AI is doing that? Is the AI essentially qualified to address this kind of question? And the whole issue of objectivity and discrimination and bias is a very real one. AI models can be tweaked, to give a certain outcome. And this was very apparent, actually, when Google launched its Gemini tool early this year. Now, to be fair to Google, they wanted to tweak the algorithm to ensure that the outputs it produced weren't discriminatory, didn't create bias. Unfortunately, the process, slightly embarrassingly for Google, went too far, and it generated visual images that, in some respects were also offensive, potentially, to the audience out there because of the extent of the tweaks that had been undertaken. Let me give you a really extreme example, actually. This is a bit theoretical, but nonetheless, I think it gets us thinking about these things. Imagine a world where the executives addressing the board are put under scrutiny by an AI tool trained in analysing facial expression and looking at verbal cues to determine whether someone is telling the truth or not. Would that be acceptable? So I think this point demonstrates that AI brings tremendous opportunities. It also creates huge risks, especially, I think, from an ethical and a governance perspective. Now, I think AI differs from some of the most potentially dangerous technologies of the past. If you think about nuclear weapons, for example, in that it's being taken forward, it's potentially hugely transformative and risky for society, as well as bringing huge benefits. But it's being taken forward by practices, which are supervised by boards of directors and funded by investors. So we are relying on corporate governance to ensure that this all happens appropriately. The question is corporate governance actually up to the job? And I would suggest that the recent experience of OpenAI, the makers of ChatGPT in the US, suggests that it may not be. OpenAI is one of perhaps half a dozen global companies which is at the forefront of artificial general intelligence, namely the quest to develop so-called God-like AI, where AI has the cognitive abilities at least as great as that as the most intelligent human being. So OpenAI believed that it could advance this agenda in a safe manner by establishing itself as a not-for-profit organization which excluded financial investors from the board. And its charter defined its purpose as benefiting humanity rather than maximizing profit. And this was reflected in the composition of its board and the fiduciary duties of its directors. So this was a very unusual governance structure for a tech company. However, the founders believed that it would shield the enterprise from commercial influences and ensure that the CEO in particular was managing the company in a way aligned with its purpose, developing safe artificial general intelligence for the benefit of humanity. Now, unfortunately, it didn't work out as they were hoping. This governance structure, unfortunately, didn't work. At the end of last year, the board decided to fire the CEO, so that's Sam Altman here, because, in their words, he was, quote, not being consistently candid with the board, end quote, and focusing too much on the commercial side of the business, meeting the commercial objectives. At this stage, there were various investors in the business, of which the main player was Microsoft. Microsoft very much objected to the firing of Sam Altman, and they immediately offered him a leading position at Microsoft. And then that was followed by many of the employees at OpenAI threatening to follow Altman out of the door, going to work for Microsoft. So this put the company actually in an existential crisis. And within a week, the board had caved in to the pressure that this had generated, and they reappointed Sam Altman as CEO of OpenAI. And within a very short period, all but one of the directors of OpenAI had left the board. They were gone. So Sam Altman was back with renewed power. I think What this episode really demonstrated is it's far from easy to eliminate the commercial imperative from an AI company, even one whose governance is deliberately designed to do that. Although Microsoft wasn't in a position to directly remove board members through shareholder voting and that kind of mechanism, which we normally see in a listed company, it was able to do something else. It could acquire its key assets, and its key assets, of course, were its human capital, its key people. And by being able to capture them, it was able to essentially render the board of OpenAI helpless. So we're in a situation after this experience, I think, of OpenAI, of wondering how can we create a governance structure for a private company that will be robust in developing AI, especially artificial general intelligence, in a safe manner. And I think that regulation will have to play a key role. And ideally, this would be pursued at a global level because AI knows no borders. But for the time being, policymakers in different jurisdictions are approaching AI in different ways. Now, the EU, which it was touched on a bit earlier, the EU's AI Act, this is taking the most risk-averse approach, I would say, to AI regulation. It's without doubt the most comprehensive piece of AI regulation that we've yet seen in the world. It will come to force in about 2 years' time, will affect any company that is active in the EU, and any firm that violates the rules risks a fine of up to 7% of annual profits. And the EU will impose cross-sectoral obligations at all stages of the life cycle of AI applications. And the Act establishes 4 levels of risk for AI systems. So those at the top there, which are deemed to pose an unacceptable risk, are just going to be prohibited. So that will include things like real-time remote facial recognition systems used in public places, systems that use biometric data to infer sensitive characteristics like people's sexual orientation or their political or religious beliefs. They are prohibited. Then we have high-risk systems. They're going to be subject to significant requirements. There will be a need for comprehensive conformity assessments. Developers will need to show that models are safe, transparent, and explainable to users, and they don't discriminate. And examples of high-risk AI systems would include those used in critical infrastructure, in medical applications, in self-driving cars, and using AI in hiring and law enforcement. Then we have limited minimal risk systems. These are things like AI which are used in spam filters, video games, and in things like ChatGPT. They will only need to follow transparency requirements and voluntary guidance, although you will still have to tell the user that you are interacting with an AI-generated content. Now, this is, as you can see, this is an incredibly comprehensive regulatory framework categorizing each type of AI technology. And there are concerns, though, in the EU that this is too onerous, that actually this is going to stifle innovation and it's going to create a very costly compliance burden. And in fact, because it's focusing on specific categories of AI applications, it could quite rapidly be rendered obsolete as technology develops in unforeseen ways. The counter-argument to that is that even big developers of AI like Google, OpenAI, and Microsoft accept that some form of AI regulation is essential, and at least the EU is trying to rise to this challenge. Now, the UK is currently adopting a different approach. The UK is very much motivated by a desire to be a leading player in AI alongside the United States and China. It wants to be seen as a place where AI innovation will happen, and it doesn't want to compromise that position by prematurely bringing in a lot of regulation of AI. So although the UK government claims that its approach is both pro-innovation and pro-safety, I would have to conclude at the moment that it's much more oriented towards the pro-innovation side of things. To be fair to the government, it is admitted that it doesn't really know at this stage how AI is going to develop. It needs more time to work this out. It's created an AI Safety Institute to look at these things in detail. And for the time being, it doesn't feel that it wants to introduce a lot of detailed regulation. And in that respect, it's rather similar to the approach that's being taken in the United States. The United States doesn't have any binding federal law which specifically regulates the development or deployment of AI. It's opted for voluntary frameworks that largely allow the tech industry to self-regulate. Now, in October of last year, President Biden issued an executive order to promote safe and responsible AI. He directed federal agencies to implement various initiatives, such as requiring those developing really advanced foundation models with serious risks to national security and public health to notify and report safety tests to the government. Also directed multiple federal bodies to develop guidelines for AI in specific sectors. So why isn't the US, given that the US is really leading the world in AI, why isn't the US leading the world in AI regulation? You know, putting to one side the fact that it's very difficult to get laws at the moment through a politically divided Congress, and certainly the forthcoming presidential election may also affect political attitudes towards regulation. Let's not forget that the tech industry in the US is incredibly powerful as a political force, and it's likely to wield considerable political influence over regulators. So it seems to me quite unlikely that going forward that the US will come up with something like the EU's AI Act. Most likely it's going to continue to leave it to existing regulators and agencies working closely with the tech companies. Now, there's one country, one leading country in AI that I haven't mentioned, and that, of course, is China. So what are they doing? Well, since 2021, China has introduced some laws around AI, for example, to regulate things like the creation of deep fakes. And in 2023, the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences drafted a version of a possible future AI law. So rather like the EU Act, it consists of, as it were, negative list of applications and products that AI companies should avoid and steer clear of unless they got explicit government approval. So this might sound as if China is sort of moving in the direction of quite a regulated approach, as in the EU, but actually most industry observers don't think it will take that route. Really the strategic imperative for the Chinese government is to ensure that China continues to be a leader in the AI world, in AI industry. So most industry commentators expect that the Chinese government will continue to take quite a light touch approach going forward. So let me finally, to conclude, consider how AI and corporate governance can actually move forward in the next few years. And I hate to be slightly more pessimistic than perhaps some of the other speakers. It does seem inevitable to me that amidst the amazing benefits, we're also going to see some major disasters arising from business seeking to apply the black box of AI to their activities. In the UK, we have just experienced a major scandal at the Post Office. It's an esteemed historic British institution, the Post Office, where some major miscarriages of justice have arisen from a defective IT system. And the board of directors and other governance actors failed to provide proper oversight of that system. Now, this wasn't an AI-driven IT system, and indeed by modern standards, it would be viewed as a relatively old-fashioned piece of IT technology, something which is used for the accounting processes which are undertaken in post office branches. Nonetheless, the scandal has really provided a wake-up call in respect of the current limitations of boards of directors in governing the application of technology. And with the rollout of AI, these challenges are going to increase exponentially. And if I'm entirely honest, I don't feel that many boards are currently up to the task of overseeing this revolution. And this is partly a generational issue. Now, as the chair of the Post Office expressed it recently when she was giving evidence at a public inquiry, she said, "I wasn't familiar with the IT language. When discussing IT issues, I didn't have the same instincts as I had when discussing issues with which I was familiar." And I'm sure that kind of view applies to many directors who are currently sitting on boards. So I think, as has been said earlier, boards will really need to rethink their competencies and composition. They'll also, I think, need to demonstrate a stronger commitment to ongoing upskilling and professional development, something which many seasoned directors are often reticent to do. And that view is expressed here in a recent paper by a very influential corporate governance observer, Leo Strine, former Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court. Also, I think, as has also been said, boards will need to engage with issues of business ethics in a much more explicit way than they have in the past. Now, of course, board work has always given rise to ethical dilemmas and complexities, but AI is going to take these ethical challenges to another level. And there is a huge risk, actually, of excessive deference to computers. And someone said a bit earlier on, part of the Asian culture is deference to one's elders. Well, I would suggest that deference to computers is a far more pernicious thing that we need to be aware of, which could lead to bad outcomes or an evasion of personal responsibility. Human beings need to stay in control. That is the bottom line here. So I think it's essential that the next generation of directors and business leaders champion the right kind of business culture. On the one hand, a business culture which really fosters innovation, but on the other hand, one which demands that AI does not result in harms or discriminations to users, customers, or wider society. And the avoidance of major externalities arising from this bad implementation of AI cannot be taken for granted. It is a real risk, and it will demand a lot from directors to deliver effective governance of the coming AI revolution. And I suspect that in the years ahead, AI will not only revolutionize business, it will not only revolutionize society, it's also going to need to revolutionize corporate governance. And actually, it would be amazing if it didn't revolutionize corporate governance, because after all, corporate governance merely reflects the underlying business community to which it relates. Thank you very much.